I'm Dan.
And I'm Alex, and welcome back to On Air. We have so much to get through. There is a lot that is happening across our wonderful world of aviation. Before we do, let's check in with the co-host. You good, Dan?
You're good? I'm good. How are you?
All is good. All is good. It was a really busy week last week, notably in Hamburg and everything that was going on with aircraft interiors. But also, it's been a really busy week this week, and there's been so much going on. I know that you've been following it, despite also kind of being on holiday, right?
Yeah, literally. I'm in Sweden visiting. Well, first of all, visiting Sweden, and then in the south of Sweden, I rented a house with my mom, my brother, who I haven't seen in 18 months. So that's been very nice. I feel like I've been so like zoned out on vacation. And then in the same week, there's AIX and IATA AGM. And I'm just like, oh, kind of getting FOMO out here. But maybe next year we can go to one of those together.
I always think that it's, there's that fine line that you start walking once you get into June in the Northern Hemisphere where you're like, sure, I'll go to that conference. And also, it's kind of the best time for a vacation.
Yeah.
And then it's like, yeah, sure, I'll commit to that in July. But then when are we going to be able to blah, blah, blah. And
I know.
So
on the one hand, like the fact that most of Europe, but especially Northern Europe during the summer is like completely MIA. It's like, oh, can we do this? Yeah, get back to me at the end of August. That drives me kind of crazy. But at the same time, I'm like, actually, I'll get to that at the end of August.
But that hasn't started. That hasn't started from now. Surely, we're only a few days into June.
Yeah, I feel like next week or in 2 weeks we'll start getting into that because school holidays start in Sweden next week. So
wow, that is early. By the way, just before we go into everything, where you are right now, are we talking 20 hours of daylight?
No, because I'm in the south, so it's
I know, but still
18 hours of daylight.
Oh, okay.
And by the way, guess my closest big city? Malmo.
Wow.
Don't you remember the good old Malmo Aviation?
Hub. You did used to fly Malmo a lot, didn't you? They were were they aircraft or were they lawnmowers with wings? I forget.
Well, they are now bra, so
yeah. Well, we don't need to go into that anymore than we already just have. So there is tons going on, and not least every airline development that is coming out of the IATA AGM. So IATA is the kind of Global Air Travel Association, and it has member airlines that cover most of the earth, and you've got from the smallest players to the heaviest players and so on. And when they gather for this AGM, they discuss all of the challenges that are happening across the air travel sector, but also things that aviation will be affected by geopolitically, everything to do with politics and weather and war and so much is on the agenda and so much is on the table. And what happens is that this AGM moves around each year in different cities that host the AGM. And this year, Emirates is hosting. So, of course, the AGM is taking place at the home of Emirates in Dubai. And when you gather all these airline leaders under one roof, Dan, we get these kind of interesting moments that don't happen at any other time of the year. It always reminds me of, when there's like a G20 summit and then there's a family photo taken and you're watching the dynamics at the time between Macron and Trump and Merkel and Boris and that everyone's kind of awkward and you're watching for, oh, did he just ignore him? Or did he just skirt around Erdogan in order to, reach Trudeau or something? That's what the AGM reminds me of a bit.
Yes, that's true. I do feel like traditionally it's a very interesting event and it's so fun, I think, to see like back-to-back interviews with different CEOs from the same person, because it's really like everything is on. This is the exact same time, the exact same day. Everything in the industry is the same. So what are different CEOs saying about the state of their airline, about the industry? And getting to hear that, it's like a really nice, very wide-ranging update. But I will say, like, these types of events generally, to me, feel like, there's not, as someone who's not an airline CEO, you're like, well, there's not that much excitement going on here. But then there's always like some kind of well, there's actually rarely some kind of plot twist, but this time there was a plot twist that they had Enrique Iglesias performing at the event on one evening for a dinner or something. And first of all, let's just acknowledge that, at least to me, that's kind of random. And I've been on social media a lot where people have made fun of Enrique Iglesias on tour and how bad his singing has been, how cringe his dancing has been.
And then IATA end up kind of having him as because there's so many people that sent me this, and we'll come to specifically what we're talking about, but there's so many people who sent me that photo, and they were asking me, I'm confused, what is IATA? Because they said, is it not a leader for, mostly grey-haired airline gathering leaders? Because the airline CEO level does have a demographic issue in terms of lack of women, lack of diversity, and so on and so on. So they said, is it not just for kind of these kind of corporate guys who are leading airlines and focused on the margins and why is there a concert, and not just any concert, but how does Enrique Iglesias fit? But there is a bit of a pattern, isn't there? Because when this last happened in Qatar, for example, they booked J-Lo.
Yeah, which is a bit. To be fair, she just canceled her summer tour because she wasn't selling tickets. So the pattern...
Maybe it's the IATA effect. Maybe this is what happens to artists
no, but
after
I feel
they
like
perform.
The pattern is just like, they're booking like people obviously who are famous, but maybe not like the most in demand. And then it's just so funny to me, like all these, as we say, gray-haired men sitting there and jamming out to Enrique Iglesias in wearing the same clothes he's been wearing for the past 20 years. And then
You're talking about Enrique, you're not talking about the airline CEO.
No. I mean, maybe them too, but especially Enrique. And then the biggest plot twist, which has, everyone who's in the aviation social media sphere has seen the collision of two worlds in the most random place and way possible, when Enrique Iglesias pulled up Sam Chewy, famous aviation YouTuber, blogger, on stage and kissed him on the cheek in front of everyone in the aviation industry.
I mean, there are definitely moments there are definitely WTF moments that follow Sam around in life. And I was just with Sam, by the way, in Hamburg. I bumped into him quite a few times, and we always, catch up and so on. But these moments seem to be in his world. They just seem to. So, of course, was I surprised to have a message? Well, was I surprised, firstly, to receive a message from you at 11 p.m. local time? Yes, definitely.
Yeah, that's the biggest surprise of all.
Yeah, that was the biggest surprise of all, right? And then, of course, when I open it, I see Sam Chewy being kissed by Enrique Iglesias on stage at a concert at the IATA AGM. And I'm thinking, yep. This is a perfectly sane aviation industry, and everything's very, very normal. I wouldn't expect anything less. We'll have to try and get Sam on so that he can tell us
what it felt like to stand in front of Scott Kirby and Badr Almir and all the others.
No, he wasn't there. There were many airline CEOs that did not attend to this concert. It's not mandatory. It's the later part of the evening. Yeah. So I know for a fact, because I've reached out to about 6 or 7 airline CEOs and asked them, what was that? And each of them said, I saw it on Twitter. I wasn't there. So it's funny, but we'll have to get Sam on to tell us what it was like, how it happened, what are his version of events.
Yeah. And the funniest...
Had they DM'd before?
Planning their meetup. But almost the funniest thing was specifically the tweet I sent you was like such an unlikely combination of worlds. And when I saw that, like, I didn't know Enrique Iglesias was performing. I didn't know Sam Chewy was there. And then it's like just the combo of everything. Like, yep, guys, that's Sam Chewy on stage getting kissed by Enrique Iglesias. And I'm just like, what is happening? But a lot of more, true interesting industry stuff did happen, and we really need to get into it because there's so much to say.
There is. Well, interestingly, one of the first bits of discussion, and this really affects Europe and in European aviation, where typically we are used to paying lower fares on the whole, maybe not in the last couple of years, But where you think them as a consumer, there may be, not much competition around in terms of choice, especially on so many routes within Europe where there are airlines that just have the monopoly. So it's €300 on Monday, or you don't go. You can't go by rail if it's from A to B and so on and so on. Well, the airline CEOs want more of that. They still feel that there are too many airlines in Europe, and therefore consolidation must take place. And when we talk about consolidation, we're literally referring to one airline swallowing up the other through an acquisition or a merger and so on. And this brings me, of course, to, merger and acquirer in chief, Lufthansa, and Group Chief Executive Carsten Spohr says that he is expecting a decision as soon as this week from the European Union on whether or not Lufthansa will be able to take over ITA Airways, of course, the Italian national airline that is former Alitalia, now ITA. He thinks it will go through, and if it does, if you look at the map of Europe, it puts Italy into this whole consolidated circle where you have ultimately Switzerland entirely run by Lufthansa in Germany. You have, and I'm not talking about operationally, but in terms of ownership. So Swiss, of course, is a Lufthansa Group airline. Austria, just next door, a Lufthansa Group airline. You have, of course, all of Germany and all of the airlines that operate to and from Germany that are under the Lufthansa Group umbrella, which is everyone from Lufthansa CityLine, City Airlines, CityLink, City Everything, as well as mainline Lufthansa, as well as Eurowings, as well as Discover, which is part of Eurowings, part of Lufthansa Group. You get the idea. And so I just wondered how you felt about hearing this, Dan, that actually they just want more airlines to disappear.
Yeah. So here's the thing. SAS CEO Anko van der Werf, he also said that consolidation is absolutely necessary. Air France KLM is taking almost 20% in SAS, but he seems pretty set on them taking the whole airline in a matter of years if, the other shareholders, so the Danish state and private equity, will agree to it. So he was saying something that I thought was quite interesting, that airlines on the extremities of Europe is what he referred to it as. So he said, SAS is an airline on the extremities, a fleet of 130 planes. We need the support of a big group from continental Europe to really be able to succeed. And I think when he talks about the extremities, that could also mean things like Lot Polish, of course, TAP Portugal, which is one that has been rumored to be acquired in some way for years. My mind also in one way goes to Iceland Air, Aegean, Air Serbia, Croatia Airlines. There's so many small airlines that they can get by, but they would do better financially as part of a bigger group.
Yeah.
As a consumer, of course, consolidation is never good in the sense that less competition means higher prices. And in my opinion, legacy airline prices are high in Europe. If you look at BA, I think has quite reasonable prices a lot of the time. But if you look at Lufthansa, or you look even at SAS, if you're flying out of Scandinavia, prices are already high.
They are. I'm always amazed at how this seems just perfectly normal, especially on those kind of especially domestic flights in Europe. Like, for example, when I went to Hamburg last week, I had the choice flying there to go via Zurich or Frankfurt or Munich, whatever. And I went into the reasons behind my decision to go to Zurich. When I looked at the domestic flight prices from Frankfurt to Hamburg, I was thinking, like, okay, I realized that I was booking kind of last minute, but is that, it's amazing to me how accepting everybody seems of that, especially when I see, for example, a business class cabin half full and they are not connecting from the US, or they're not international travelers, but they're Germans and they're boarding with, for example, a carrier bag, bless them, with bananas and a loaf of bread because they popped to that city for one reason or another, and then they're popping 45 minutes back home. And I'm thinking, did you pay €600 to fly this? And if
Yeah.
so, how do you feel about that? Because you could have gone to the Maldives from London.
Yeah, that's true. It is kind of crazy. I mean, of course, if you're planning further in advance, prices aren't quite as crazy, but an
Yeah.
airline like Lufthansa has such a control of the domestic German market and any outbound and inbound travel to Germany that, of course, it's really frustrating for people who live there that they have that type of pricing power. So,
Yeah.
what I was going to get to, you know, speaking of the negative side of consolidation, the positive side, which I think there's a lot to be said for this, is that airlines are allowed to still exist. So if SAS, now they've been acquired partly by Air France KLM, if they are fully in the coming years, that will allow SAS to operate in Scandinavia profitably, hopefully, and still be around to serve the people of Scandinavia. Because unfortunately, the alternative is kind of, well, maybe the airline won't exist at all. And this is something we've seen through the past decades in Europe with something like Adria, the national airline of Slovenia.
Slovenia, yeah.
Star Alliance member, founded in the 60s and operated for almost 60 years before going bankrupt right before COVID at the end of 2019.
Yeah.
And for a country like Slovenia, Oscar and I were there a few years ago, this is devastating because now you look at flights to Slovenia, prices are way higher than they used to be because there's so much less competition. There's much fewer flights. So the end result is not really that foreign airlines fully fill the void, but instead the country and the economy as a whole suffers. So it's one of those sticky situations. And I'm curious to hear, Alex, what you think. Like, what is the better outcome? That you have foreign airlines trying to fill the void, which might sometimes work, or locals just have to accept maybe higher fares through consolidation?
Well, I think it just depends case by case, but on the whole, to speak generally, of course, there are different answers depending on who you are representing, right? Or who you are speaking for in this debate. So on the airline side of things, of course, there can be impressive stats on why it would absolutely make sense for a Lufthansa Group airline to swoop in and rescue an airline that perhaps even doesn't realize it needs to be rescued, right? And that we've seen that before. And at the same time, we can see the negative effects of what happens when you just have the same airline group ruling that market only without the opportunity for the local airline to have been able to flourish properly or to obtain different ways of investments. Aviation is an incredibly difficult game. It is, relentless in the way that it loses money. And although this year we are set to have record airline profits, margins remain absolutely tiny. Again, the average airline is making around the cost of an espresso per economy class flight ticket in terms of actual profit. The rest is just covering the very high overheads that airlines face in everything. And that's now where globally things are not too bad this week, or in the past few weeks. We're not seeing a crazy fluctuating fuel price. We're not seeing a wider conflict worsen for now. And I really feel that we go week by week with this, right? I think when we were younger, I feel like there were periods of time that were more uncertain, then periods that were better, and so on. Now it's like, okay, well, this week wasn't bad for airlines. Oil stayed at a decent price, and there was no escalation with Russia, Ukraine, and there was no real escalation or worsening in other parts of the world where there are conflict. And so that's why everything is just that's why aviation remains incredibly vulnerable to all of that. So yeah, just to go back to your original question, I just think it really depends on the case. Of course, I think in Slovenia's case, Adria was struggling and there are different areas. But let's look at an airline that's doing well. Let's look at Aegean in Greece, for example. Does Aegean, a very, very key player in the Star Alliance, does that, which of course is what the alliance that Lufthansa Group is very much the founder member of, does Aegean need Lufthansa Group to swoop in and have the airline be absorbed as part of a wider German-run group? Well, no, because it's doing well, it's financially sound. But would AGN be a bit more bullish and a bit more aggressive in their plans had they had someone like the Lufthansa Group behind them? Probably.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think the question should also be, would they benefit from it? Because, yeah, they might be profitable now, but I think under any type of group, any airline that is profitable will, of course, have more resources and, lower unit costs and everything than if they're independent. Now, of course, Air Baltic, again, is such a fascinating case of an airline that was profitable in 2023, but I can't even understand, how do they do so well entirely independently? They're not even in an alliance, let alone have these very close partnerships with other airlines. Yet they managed to turn a profit at what is now the extremities of the European Union and sort of the border of war and instability.
Sitting in Russia's backyard,
Yeah. It's fascinating.
It's definitely a testament to how I think Air Baltic is run by the CEO, Martin Garson. I only ever hear positive things about kind of strategy and policy and so on. Just before we move on, we'll go to TAP, to Portugal's national airline, and the chief executive of TAP is quite clear, okay, in this scenario and on this topic, that he wants the government to maintain a stake in the flag carrier no matter what happens to TAP, because of course TAP is also likely to be swooped up by one of the key players across Europe. And it's literally like, the birds are circling, aren't they, to pick up those that are on the fringes of Europe, and because they worry what could happen. There is unease even in Europe about an industry just dominated by a handful of the region's biggest airline groups. We're talking about IAG and Lufthansa Group. So it is funny to take us back to why we opened this subject, as to why the rhetoric from these groups that already rule Europe is that, more airlines have got to go. Yeah, there's too many. There's too many.
I just want to say it is interesting, going all the way back to what we were saying about Lufthansa Group wanting to acquire ITA. ITA, of course, is in SkyTeam. Then we have Air France KLM, SkyTeam, acquiring SAS, who are Star Alliance. Then, as far as I'm aware, the biggest or the most interested group in TAP is IAG, who are Oneworld, and then TAP, of course, is Star Alliance. So literally in this case, we would have Lufthansa, of course, poaching ITA into Star Alliance, but then so all airlines are kind of changing alliances, where in my mind it would be more natural to see an airline that's already in Star Alliance maybe being acquired by Lufthansa Group, or an airline that's already in SkyTeam being acquired by Air France KLM, and that sort of thing.
Well, that brings us nicely to some other developments that have come out of the IATA AGM, and the Saudi newcomer that we often speak about, Riyadh Air. They signed 2 new partnerships with 2 Asian carriers. Well, actually, I understand there's a couple more deals on the way over the course of today, Wednesday. So by the time we publish, there may be a few more developments on this. But for now, Riyadh have signed a deal, interestingly, with Singapore Airlines to explore opportunities related to interline connectivity. So that's when an airline is having an interline agreement with another airline, it's basically partnering up, either code sharing or enabling a flow of passengers across each other's services and so on, but also in the areas of customer experience, digitalization and so on. And Riyadh Air also signing a similar kind of deal with Air China to explore connectivity opportunities. Now, the first thing that jumped out to me when I saw that Riyadh had signed this deal with Singapore and Air China was, these are both Star Alliance carriers.
Yes. My thought
Is
too.
Riyadh Air angling and preparing for a future where, they're always talking about connectivity when this airline launches in mid-2025? Are we going to see Riyadh Air in Star Alliance? And if so, you come back to this episode because you heard it here first.
Yeah. And isn't that interesting to think about which alliance has the biggest hole in the Middle East? Because they're all actually quite well represented. Of course,
They are.
the closest option in the Middle East in Star Alliance is Egypt Air. Then you have Air India. So actually in the Gulf, there is no Star Alliance member. But
Yeah.
am I forgetting something? No, I'm not.
No, you're not forgetting.
And
But
Turkish
what I was going to
Airlines,
say
of
about
course.
Egypt Air is, interestingly, I have from a reliable source that we will have a Riyadh Air, Egypt Air partnership announcement by the end of the week.
Interesting. Yeah, that would be very fascinating. And I actually wanted to ask you, because we've been seeing this trend over the past few, I would say the past decade at least, that alliances are becoming less and less important, and airlines are just sort of partnering with whoever they want, whoever suits them.
Yeah.
What do you think is the role? Are alliances still important, or
I think there are becoming, I think in terms of the flow of passengers from one to the other, is becoming less important as airlines just become less exclusive with their terms to do with the alliance. So you're right. I think years and years ago, we wouldn't have seen one airline kind of jump into bed with another airline and sign up with different agreements and code sharing and whatever if that airline belonged to a different alliance. I think we're in a different world now. The world is a smaller place and airlines only want it to become smaller. And I think if one airline can see that there is real potential and financial gain from establishing some kind of partnership with another airline that is outside of that alliance, the fact that it is outside that alliance is not stopping them. And we're seeing that. I'm really noticing that this year, over the last year. So I think that, yeah, in that sense, things become less important only out of the actions of an airline who is thinking, actually, we have a lot to gain from this. We don't need to, there are so many areas that we can work with only our alliance fellow members, but that doesn't necessarily mean that, they have to shy away from potentially lucrative, profitable deals that with carriers outside of their family group.
Yeah. And something has to be said still for the value of an alliance, because if we look at Qatar Airways, which besides Saudia and, go back just a few years, most people were not connecting flights in Saudi Arabia on Saudia. So besides Saudia, Qatar Airways has really been the only airline in the whole Gulf that's part of an alliance. You have Kuwait Airways, Gulf Air, Emirates and Etihad, of course, and Oman Air, which is now joining Oneworld, but has also been independent for a long time.
Yeah.
This is a region where alliances are not really a thing. But I would say that Qatar Airways being part of Oneworld has actually been a great thing for them. And you see a lot of Oneworld loyalists, coming to Doha. Of course, all these Oneworld airlines, Qatar Airways has been able to bring to Doha to put less pressure on their own operation. The alliance has played a really central part there. And I think partly, for many, let's say, domestic American Airlines flyers who don't venture out much into the world, if you just look at Oneworld ads, for example, Doha is almost always mentioned there in the mix. So even for the country of Qatar, being in a respected big alliance like Oneworld, I feel it is a big deal and it is a good thing for them.
What do you think about how these alliances actually tell passengers, what they can do as a result of being in that alliance? And I mean that because, for example, I'll meet a European frequent flyer based in Doha, for example, and they may be a platinum with privilege club here with Qatar, right? And it always amazes me how little they know as to what their benefits are across multiple other airlines. So, for example, I'm explaining to them, when you're in Japan next week and you're taking a domestic flight from Osaka to Tokyo, for example, you're flying economy, right? And he says to me, yeah, okay, you know that because you are platinum with Qatar, which is Oneworld Emerald, you can go straight to the business class check-in. You can board with priority. You have extra luggage allowance that's complimentary for checked-in luggage, sometimes also for cabin bags. You have lounge access and so on. And it's usually the answer is, no, I didn't know any of that.
Yeah.
And I always think Oneworld has all of them have such a communication problem with actually being able to, the stickers on the side of the aircraft. It's also in the corner of your boarding pass. You notice it. I notice it. Nobody else does. Yeah, I just think, how do they communicate better?
That's interesting. I think maybe, especially in the case of a place like Qatar, someone can very easily have status, but they're not in the frequent flyer mentality, quote unquote.
Correct.
And, you know, you look in Europe and the US, and I think there's a lot of people who are very strategic about trying to earn status, and people chase it. So they're more conscious about what are the benefits. But if, you know, you're looking at a place like Qatar, or maybe people have status with Emirates and they don't know what benefits they can get with some of Emirates partners, that's more one of those situations where people maybe are not as informed. But in general, I do feel like people look to book in their alliance, and it's crazy when you realize how much loyalty blinds people. And the summit I was at in Toronto, I guess about a month ago now, told you guys about it on the podcast. I spoke to so many people who were like, I live in San Francisco, which is a United hub, but I'm loyal to American, and I'm irrationally loyal to them. So I will fly to Dallas, or I'll fly to Phoenix anytime I need to go anywhere and connect, rather than flying direct on United, even if United is cheaper. And that is the point of loyalty and, you know, alliances, being able to get a loyal American Airlines passenger when they're in Japan to say, you know what, Japan Airlines is in Oneworld, and I'm going to choose them over ANA, for example.
Yeah. And that's what they are hoping that you are. That's the
intention,
are hoping,
and
that you are going through those decision-making processes in order to stay loyal, you know?
Yeah. And I think that that's something airlines somehow miss, because in the idea that we want people to fly with us, because ultimately, you know, if you choose Royal Jordanian over Qatar Airways, even though they're the same alliance, Qatar Airways doesn't really like that. So the focus is still on, these are the benefits when you fly with us and stick with us.
Rather than the family.
Exactly. But I think that airlines could emphasize the appeal of being able to get benefits with other airlines, especially on other continents and far away, because that's ultimately one of the most valuable things about an alliance. And, you know, I think for anyone who has status in an alliance, we would love to see alliances grow. Like, of course, you and I would love to see Oneworld expand more than just Fiji Airways and Oman Air, and add some really big players, because for us, that's a game changer. And another airline we can get benefits on and earn points and status qualifying points on, and that kind of stuff.
And I like that development, that we now have confirmation that Fiji Airways is going to be a fully, fledged member of the Oneworld Alliance next year. It's nice. Have you flown Fiji?
No, I have not.
Okay,
but
I was part of the A350. I was part of the A350 delivery of Fiji Airways, and beautiful design, beautiful. I've said this before, haven't I? I always like it when a country with real strong cultural identity and design that dates back to this meaning and that meaning is able to lift that into and integrate it into the design of a beautiful shiny new A350 cabin. And I think Fiji Airways did that really well. It's one of the best deliveries. Really nice delivery event. Also in Airbus Toulouse. I think that was just before the pandemic. Yeah, it was one of the last ones just before the pandemic. Well, there was also talks about what is happening with the state of play across the aviation sector in terms of aircraft orders, right? So if you happen to just follow a news website or an aviation site on Twitter or so on, you're often seeing about how this airline is in talks for this and this airline is in talks for that. Well, we put together a bit of a list, a bit of an update. Okay, so here's where we are. Most recently, Turkish Airlines have confirmed they are now in active discussion with Boeing for up to 250 aircraft, which is mammoth when you remember that just 5 minutes ago in December 2023, Turkish announced an order with Airbus for 230 aircraft, which included everything from 350-900s, 350-1000s, 350 cargo versions, and so on and so on. So we're looking at a sizable order ahead from Turkish Airlines. We know there's a sizable order ahead coming from Qatar Airways, who said that they had released the RFP to the market, and it's up to Airbus and Boeing to figure out what they are going to offer. When the CEO in the CNBC interview in March, Badr Mohammed Al-Mir, was asked, how big is this aircraft order? He simply said, it's big. So we expect that it's going to be significant, probably along the similar 200 or so scope. Royal Air Maroc, of course, based out of Morocco, member of the Oneworld Alliance, in talks for an aircraft order, also releasing an RFP to the market for around 200. Malaysia Airlines want 25 narrow bodies. FlyNAS want 30 wide bodies. Flyadeal want another 10, at least 10 wide bodies. El Al want another 30 narrow bodies. Cathay Pacific want narrow bodies. Cebu Pacific has issued an RFP to the market, of course they're a low-cost carrier in the Philippines, for over 150 narrow-body single-aisle aircraft. Pegasus doing a similar thing. Riyadh Air, of course, expecting to announce soon what they're referring to as a mid-size capacity wide-body aircraft order. So mid-size capacity, we're looking at kind of Dreamliner style capacity, in addition to the Dreamliners that they already have on order. Also, there's going to be a narrow body order. So when we talk about narrow body, we're speaking about those single aisle aircraft like an A320 or 737. So that's the second part of their order. And then, of course, Riyadh Air have confirmed that they will be ordering a larger capacity wide body aircraft order. So if you think about their use of the word larger capacity there, and it's a wide body, that can only really be something like an A350 or a 777, 777X, and so on. So airlines are spending their money. We are in the cycle now where they are spending after, all that damage with COVID, now building back, having record profits. But I don't know how long this is going to last. There are also other interesting developments coming out of the AGM in relation to when these new aircraft are even going to arrive, because we know that Boeing is going through crisis right now, and much of that is to do with the 737 MAX. Well, Emirates President Tim Clark says that Boeing has kind of stalled on everything related to the 777X, which is deeply concerning because this is an aircraft that is already several years late and hasn't yet isn't anywhere near to arriving at any of its airline customers, and its customers include Emirates, of course, Qatar, Lufthansa, and several others. He worries that Boeing is so preoccupied with the crisis right now that centers around the 737 MAX that he kind of hinted that they're not really receiving flight test program updates on the 777X, that there has been no real movement with the 777X, which is already incredibly late. Do you think this is going to be the next talking point in terms of once we move on a bit from what's happening at Boeing now? Do you think, Dan, that it's all going to switch to, wow, airlines just are going to be in a difficult situation because now the 777X is going to face even further delays?
I would not want to be an airline relying on the 777X right now. And, looking at Emirates, Qatar Airways, Cathay Pacific, Singapore Airlines, British Airways, so many airlines that have ordered quite a few of these. It's a scary position to be in because the aircraft is already 5 years delayed, pretty much.
Yeah.
And we see things are not going well with Boeing. Thinking back to 2020, 2019, those were not years when Boeing were producing great quality airplanes. So I think Scott Kirby said something really interesting, the CEO of United at AGM, that he is really, hoping and gunning for a new competitor for Airbus and Boeing, because we have these huge problems with Boeing. We cannot rely on this aircraft getting certified anytime soon. But Airbus also has delivery delays and they cannot keep up with the timelines and promises they have made. So this is putting airlines in really, really tricky situations, and oil prices are quite high. So, airlines having to keep around old, inefficient planes is also not great. What is the solution to this? I don't know. Airbus or Boeing needs to get its stuff together, but ideally, there need to be more than two wide-body aircraft manufacturers. In my mind, I don't know, where we're going to see that from quite yet. what is a realistic contender. Airline CEOs are talking about the need for this more and more because we're seeing the problems with the duopoly and how vulnerable the industry becomes when something is going wrong with just one of them.
And that's the period that we're in now, right? And to be honest, things are not just going wrong with one of them; they're going wrong with both of them and their suppliers. We're in a scenario where the supply chain issues is basically the number one topic that everybody was speaking about while I was in Hamburg, because you've got airlines trying to commit to these fancy new business class and first class cabins, and the moment they start the whole discussion of, yeah, but can you deliver this, for example, in 2 years? I'm watching these executives from these seat manufacturers being like, well, we don't want to make, they were saying, we don't want to make promises that we can't keep, and we're going to let you know, and we're going to speak, because they face real issues. The supply chain is absolutely horrendous ever since COVID, and it extends all across the aviation sector. With United Airlines CEO Scott Kirby's comments on him wanting a new competitor to Airbus and Boeing, I did think it was interesting that he did already settle the whole look, but that's not going to be China's Comac. I mean, there are some carriers, and there are definitely some markets that I think that Comac will be able to be a key player in eventually. But I have to say that I agree with Scott Kirby. I don't think we're going to see the rise of Comac to even have Airbus and Boeing kind of peer over their shoulder to see what's going on. They are in such a comfortable duopoly that I'm just not sure. I mean, and if it's not Comac, who is it? Are we relying on Embraer to stand up? And, once upon a time, maybe we would be having a conversation about Bombardier and how successful the C Series was. But of course, Airbus, we're not going to let that stay as a standalone program for long, swooped up, and that is now the A220. It's interesting. These comments are valid from Scott Kirby. I just think that even in our lifetime, I don't think there's going to be a third player. Unless, of course, aviation is massively disrupted in a way in which, from an innovation point of view, where we just are not flying in 15 years as we are now, because you're able to get from London to New York in 2 hours, because boom, we're able to dominate, the aviation sector by offering these competitive hypersonic aircraft and so on. That's the only way I see that there's going to be a third player of the future. Otherwise, I think we're stuck. Speaking of some of the other things that came out of the AGM, we know that the Qantas A350s that will be flying the Project Sunrise flights, so they are the flights that will connect the likes of Sydney with London, and they're on track to launch next year. And that is the update, that they are on track, which is good news, and that the additional center fuel tank on the A350-1000 that will enable such a long-haul, ultra-long-haul flight has been approved and certified. So that's good news for Australia and for Qantas, which does seem to be in a better place under the new leadership of their new CEO. She's definitely less in the headlines than Joyce was, specifically in his last year, which was kind of just shrouded in what the Australian media were calling scandal. Something else that caught my eye, Dan, is that the US Department of Transportation, the DOT, is imposing around a $2.5 million civil penalty fine collectively against Lufthansa, KLM, and South African Airways. And this fine is going to these airlines for significant delays, which is what the DOT cites, in providing almost $1 billion in refunds owed to passengers. Of course, they must be US passengers, due to flights that were disrupted by the COVID pandemic. And this is after thousands of airline customers, and again, I assume in the US, were forced to wait for several months. I mean, some were waiting way more than months. Some have waited over a year. KLM and Lufthansa each receive a hit of around $1.1 million in penalties, and both carriers were credited $550K for refunds for non-refundable tickets on US flights. South African Airways, of course, financially struggling, ordered to pay $300K. Also, I definitely think we are seeing a new era of the US Department of Transportation, right? Pete Buttigieg is aggressively gunning for any kind of injustice between the airline and the consumer. And he's absolutely on the side of the consumer, isn't he?
Yeah, which I love. I'm so excited to see what he's doing. Of course, the biggest news as a whole for people flying to or from the US or in the US was what we discussed several weeks ago about him, basically requiring airlines to provide automatic refunds in certain situations. So I think this is nice that to see a government holding airlines accountable. Many times we don't see airlines holding, or we don't see countries holding the airlines of their country responsible because they're so closely tied to the economic success of their country. But yeah, I am quite enjoying what we're seeing from Pete.
I want to just take you through some of the cool things that happened at AIX while I was there. That's the Aircraft Interiors Expo in Hamburg. So not only were there some of the best seats on display that I've seen for a while, there were airlines in the back rooms trying to get these suppliers to commit. And so that was what was happening in the back. And most of these suppliers, from what I understand, was struggling to commit. Okay. The other interesting developments that came out of AIX were the renewed focus on accessibility. And there were so many new innovations from the likes of Delta and so on ensuring that air travel is as easy as possible for those, for example, who are wheelchair users, for those who have special needs and so on. And I just think it's a much overdue push I was really pleased to see the likes of Delta and others demonstrating how on a narrow body aircraft, for example, a wheelchair could be locked in to special tracks that can be certified as safe for air travel. And so it opens up air travel for, a wider demographic than those who perhaps would be put off because they would think that that situation is too complicated for an airline that only has 30 minutes to turn the aircraft around and let's go. And I just thought it was a welcome pause to see there was really a lot of focus on, and I saw everything. I saw different lavatory designs, accessible lavatory designs that genuinely are more spacious and still able to be cost efficient for airlines and so on. That was a nice key theme that definitely came out of this year's AIX.
Yeah, I was really happy to see that too.
Also at AIX, I managed to have a look at, because I like the kind of the disruptors, the innovators, the individuals that are taking on and pushing against an industry narrative that there is also loads of consolidation with cabin design and everything, and all these companies are, having the monopoly and duopoly and so on and so on. But there is an individual I want to talk about. His name is Alex. He's a designer and he's only 24. He's from Madrid and he is disrupting what can be offered to airlines in terms of an efficient use of space, first in economy, now in business, by offering this new, what he's calling a double level elevated class aircraft monument, which basically is a monument. And we talk about monument, it is a seating structure that would be placed in the middle of the aircraft, that on one side is a lower level business class seat. And by lower level, I mean level with the aisle that you're standing in. On the other side, it's the same. But then behind it and above, and it's quite difficult to describe, so definitely check out my Twitter for this. If you were to go above, you take a few steps up on this same seating structure, and sitting above these two business class seats is what would be a first class seat. So it's a concept, and there's definitely still work ahead, but it's definitely an interesting concept. And I massively respect Alex, who's only 24, who has been able to reveal and launch this concept and this product at the Aircraft Interiors Expo alongside some of the biggest names in the industry. He's not shying away from his elevations since the first time he was there with the economy class product. And I'm happy to say that he is also a listener to the podcast. I did catch up with him and he just took me through what this latest product of his is all about. The economy class concept is quite famous now. I mean, it's gone viral everywhere. What's the concept? What's the prototype that you've unveiled today at Hamburg?
Well, today we have
Right now.
Today we have unveiled a brand new concept that is called the elevated class. It's a hybrid seat that has both a first class seat and a business class seat inside. So they are basically attached to each other, and it makes the cabin much more fluid in terms of that you can have different types of seating for different types of experience for different types of passenger. The main idea is that this seat would go for any luxury airline out there that wants to create a whole new concept, a whole new innovation inside the airline industry. And our main challenge was to get this inside an aircraft that it actually fits. But we could put this in any long-haul aircraft right now. So it would go on the central section of the A350, 330, 380, 777, and 787, of course. So yeah, the idea is that this can go in the central section because you can adapt the width of the module. Right now it's quite wide. This prototype would probably be designed for an A350 or an A380, but you could slightly reduce the size, so make it less wide, and therefore you could fit this into any other type of aircraft.
Tell me what you said earlier about how you said that in Europe there's no innovation, and that's what you said, there's been a lack of innovation.
I mean, if you look at luxury...
Why are you doing this?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
If you look at luxury airlines right now, most of them come from Asia Pacific region and the Middle East. And I think that's because in Europe they are much more focused on cabin density, which is not bad, but at the same time they are all using the same type of seat with slight different modifications and, as we were saying, CMF, so color, material and finish. But in the most part they all use the same kind of concepts, and no one is really innovative in Europe. So what we want to do is, with this prototype and with this concept, we want to allow those airlines that want to maintain a 40-inch seat pitch, 40 or 44, sorry, to actually put a very innovative seat without losing any passenger density in their cabin. So they can still have a first class in the business class configuration that they currently fly with.
How old are you?
I'm 24.
Okay. What about the whole, you're 24, what you're doing is incredibly disruptive, or there's no one brave enough. So how is it to be 24 and be taking on the big guys? Like, we're sat here surrounded by established big names. This hasn't let you stop innovating. That's the good thing, right?
I mean, if I'm honest with you, a couple of years ago when we started with the economy class, the first thing that I heard is that this guy is crazy and he's just going to be here for 1 year at the Aircraft Interiors Expo and then he will never show up again. But the thing is that with the first concept, we were able to gain enough traction and enough support from different sponsors in order to continue. Last year, we presented a new prototype that was much better. It had all the kinematics, all the mechanisms, and all the movements. And they started to think that I'm not so crazy. And this year, we decided to go crazy again, but this time in a very informed way. So we did it, we educated ourselves during the past 3 years, and now we know what can be done and what cannot be done. And that's why we decided to take on the big guys and bring out a brand new business first class concept.
I think he's so cool. It's so inspiring to see someone so young doing something that, like, if I think, okay, I'm going to design an aircraft seat, I'm like, where do I even start? I can draw something, but then how do I actually get this physical seat produced and sent to an event where airline CEOs are going to see it? It's just amazing. And I think the seat looks all his seats, both in economy and the premium mock-up, look so cool. As he says, it would be fun to see some airlines do something slightly different. We've been hearing for so long that, well, we haven't heard it recently, but we did hear Qatar Airways was going to revolutionize economy, pre-COVID, but we still haven't seen something truly revolutionary from any airlines yet, which I hope we do see at some point.
We're relying on you, Alex. We are relying on Alex, the CEO and founder of Shay Long. That's the name of the company if you want to go and take a look. But I also tweeted a couple of things, and you can follow him on Instagram as well. He's a cool follow, so you can see what he's up to in terms of the developments with this. He's at alex.nvb. So yeah, it was a really insightful week. It was good. It was great to see what's happening in the industry, but I specifically like, those little different things, the disruptors, the innovation, the accessibility, and just ensuring that, I mean, Dan, we've often said, if aviation worked as well as everything that was in that room, that conference, we would have the greatest industry on earth. There's this thing, you stand there and the airlines are saying, and when you're at home, you can order this through our app and someone will be standing at your arrival to give you this bag to take it. And they just sell you a dream, right? And then you hear someone in the background say, yeah, Lufthansa lost my luggage on the way here.
And they haven't been able to find it for 7 days. Like you still hear so many of those stories.
Exactly, like you hear so often. So, there is that kind of, that difference, that contrast. Well, look, we've had a great discussion and a great run through many of these developments. We do have some questions, so let's dive into Q&A. Marco begins by asking, hey, Dan and Alex, love the podcast. Did you guys see Emirates president's comments on how Heathrow is essentially a dump? He says,
yes.
He says, okay, I'm paraphrasing, but Tim Clark described Heathrow as a Second World War airport. Thoughts? Well, this was interesting. This is the comments that he made a couple of days ago, also at the AGM. I did a poll in anticipation of discussing this, so I'll just go to the results now on Twitter. I tweeted, Emirates Airline President Tim Clark has said London Heathrow Airport is, quote, not good enough and, quote, looks like a Second World War airport, accusing the airport of putting its shareholders before actually running a decent airport. Do you agree? So I put the poll on last night. We've had 1,343 responses. 57% of people agree with Tim Clark that Heathrow is a Second World War airport. 13% say no, Heathrow is fine. 30% say that it does depend on the terminal. So there's a decent majority there, 57%, that Heathrow is not good enough. But a sizable amount, 30%, say that actually it just depends on the terminal. And of course, Tim Clark was speaking specifically about where he's based in Heathrow at Terminal 3. And he said that he was in this interview commenting on how he was like, just look at the ceiling height. He was like, look at the ceiling height outside our lounge, which is true, isn't it? T3 is a bit old.
Yeah. I just got to say, I really enjoy when airline CEOs can say stuff like this. This is one of the things I enjoy about Sir Tim Clark, that he's very honest and he doesn't sugarcoat things. Sometimes you see CEOs trying to, be very diplomatic and not step on anyone's toes, but he's not afraid to say what he feels, and I really appreciate that.
Do you agree that Heathrow is a Second World War airport?
No comment. We
come
spoke
on.
enough about
this
this
is
last
the podcast.
year. We spoke enough about this last year that, of course.
Sorry,
yeah.
I just remembered who I'm asking. Yeah, you're right. You are right. Joanna is asking, hey guys, what do you think about the deal with QR and Starlink? I think this is great. This is, for anyone that missed this is Qatar Airways have signed that deal with Starlink, Elon Musk's Wi-Fi provider. It'll be on the first aircraft in October this year. And also it means that free Wi-Fi for every single passenger is coming to these aircraft with Starlink. The CEO says it will be fleet-wide within 2 years. The Wi-Fi will be so beautifully fast, we'll be able to stream live sports, live news. I can watch the tennis in flight. I am so ready for this, Joanna. What about you?
I mean, of course, it's really cool. It's good to have the opportunity. We've said before that a part of me likes the feeling of having an excuse not to have to be super productive. And flights can be that, where it's like, oh, the Wi-Fi isn't fast enough to get anything done, or just to take but now there will be no excuses. So it's good and bad. But of course, having the option is very valuable.
Yeah, you can exercise your right to not use the Wi-Fi, but I shall be logging on. So it's funny that you'd rather limit it for the rest of us just to protect your own, well-being, which I respect. No one's forcing you to log on, Dan. Okay?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people feel
temptation.
that way. Let us know if you agree.
Yeah.
Hi, Dan. Question for the podcast with Alex from Giron, I think is how you pronounce your name. Can you recommend something to make business class seats more comfortable? I flew BA Club Suites last week and found the seats really difficult to sleep in. I have an upcoming LHR to KIP in an older 787 later in the year and would like to sleep. Thanks. What is KIP? What airport is that? Am I missing something? Okay, KIP airport is
No, it's
definitely not a
No.
major international airport. But
It's Wichita,
yeah, okay,
but this is like a small thing. This is not somewhere that BA flies.
yeah, absolutely not. But okay, in
I wonder
general,
where.
do we have any hacks or I guess tricks that can make? I mean, let's be honest, we're all
Bedding.
very lucky to be flying business class to start with, and having a lie flat bed is, of
Often.
course, the biggest luxury
Yeah.
of all.
Yeah.
But what
I'm
are some
surprised to hear that
tricks?
he's struggling to sleep in the BA Club Suite because the seat has really decent padding.
Yeah, that's
And
true.
you just slept really well, didn't you, recently? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I will say that if the flight is not full, or even if it is, you can try to get more blankets and more pillows. And that way you can, like, you know, first of all, put a blanket below you to make it a bit softer. Of course, having good earplugs, a good eye mask if you want that. For
I have the
me-
pillow spray. The pillow spray works for me. Yeah,
Interesting.
that's
For
good.
me,
a
I'm just
lavender
like,
pillow spray knocks me out.
yeah, I feel like that does nothing for me, but I'm glad it works for you. And I've noticed that for me,
Patronizing.
For me, the dry air is a big thing. So I've actually, this sounds kind of crazy. I can't remember if I said it on the podcast, but
Oh,
I've
God.
started sleeping,
God.
sleeping in a
With-
mask. on
I knew
flights.
it. I knew it. I knew it. Oh,
Because
dear.
it really helps.
Sound
with
the
dry
alarm,
air.
guys. I'm doing a podcast with some Gen Z TikTok, like mask
It
wearing
helps.
sleep suit. Oh God. Oh
It
dear.
helps against dry air.
I knew what was coming. Listen, I understand. Well, mind you, weren't you on a really old 777 on that flight?
Yeah, I was.
wasn't
But
it?
even on 350s, I find the air far too dry. So,
Yeah.
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 Anyway,
Okay. Well, I don't know about seeing a whole cabin full of scary-looking scream mask people who are in masks, but I respect the hydration aspect of it. But also, it just makes me feel deeply uncomfortable that my podcast host is a Gen Z TikToking YouTuber.
stop.
So-
I'm too tired for this slander, especially when I feel like that it wouldn't be weird for you at all to do this.
No, excuse me. Don't make this about me. I do not wear masks on aircraft, apart from the ones that are N95 and are covering my mouth and nose.
Exactly.
If,
And that's what I
no,
wear.
that was
what
during the pandemic.
I wear a KF94 to sleep. Thank you. No judgment here.
Yeah. Still now, today.
Yeah, well, I stopped for like a few years, but then
Yeah.
I realized that I was so bothered by the dry air that in the past maybe 3-4 months, every time I want to sleep, I wear it and problem solved.
Wait, sorry. Are you speaking about a mask that goes like a hydration beauty mask that goes all over your face? Or are you speaking about...
No, I'm speaking about a
Oh
KF94.
God, I just roasted you for no reason. I freaking wear masks. I thought you meant like, hey guys, this is my mask, like
What?
from forehead to chin.
Not a fucking face, not that kind of mask. This is such a good misunderstanding.
That's why I called you a TikToker and a Gen Z and everything. I was like, he's telling me that the mask is such a... Oh, so you wear a mask like a
KF94 over my nose and mouth to keep the moisture in. Thank you.
Okay. I do that from time to time,
Yeah.
especially if it's a single hour flight, for sure.
Yeah, I'm not wearing one of those, beauty masks. That's the disclaimer.
That's why I went crazy. My apologies. I'm sorry, Dan.
You think
It's
I
not
sleep
often
in one of
that-
those and it's just like slopping around on the seat and falling off and getting goo everywhere.
Well, that's what I was
No.
wondering. And you were swearing like, oh, and I said to you, I respect the hydration. Why would I respect the hydration about it? And you know what? I think we're at the end of today's episode, clearly.
We are both
look.
very I'm very tired today for some reason, guys. So sorry if I've
I don't
sounded
know
very
why.
zombie-like.
No, you're fine. You're fine. We went through a lot. We covered a lot of ground. There's so many questions. We'll have to go through them tomorrow. But as always,
Tomorrow, next week.
next week, goodness.
Okay.
See, that's how eager I am, Dan. I'm just ready to get going tomorrow, really. But
I
yeah,
know,
okay,
me
well, I guess
too.
I'll
I need a
have
week
to
to
wait.
recover from this week's episode.
You need a week to recover from every episode. Let's be real. The week comes around so fast ever since we launched on air. Am I
Yeah.
right? Or
It does, and I'm sitting here so tired that I'm just
Why?
like taking this roast that I'll need a week to recover from, not even realizing we're talking about two entirely different types of masks.
I know.
So
I know.
My God, it's time to.
Okay, we'll have
it's
to
time
keep
for
that
me
bit
to
in
go
as
take a
well.
nap.
Well, I don't know why, because it's morning. You should be bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. You're in southern Sweden, and the sun is shining, I assume. So, time to
You
seize the
assume the
day.
sun is shining in Sweden. That's your first mistake, Alex.
Oh dear.
It's
Oh, well, now I understand
cloudy
the
and
tiredness.
15 degrees.
Oh dear. Oh, that definitely sounds like vacation. Well, look, I look forward to catching up with you. Maybe not tomorrow, but next week, and we'll join the listeners then.
I will see you then, and we will see all you guys then on air. Bye bye.
See you later.